I'm 34M, and if there's one thing I've learned about my family, it's that they love to remind me where I supposedly stand. According to them, I've always been the one with small ideas and wasted potential. My older sister, Corinne, was the golden star since birth, straight A's, scholarships, a job at a prestigious firm, the works. And my dad, Lionel, never lets anyone forget who his pride and joy is. I've never been in competition with Corinne, at least not in my own mind. I like different things, building, designing, fixing what people threw away. While she was on debate teams and internships, I was in the garage with a pile of scrap wood, turning it into furniture. My mom used to shake her head and call it a hobby. My dad called it playing handyman. Corinne just smirked and asked me if I'd be taking orders for birdhouses when she got her first apartment. I laughed it off for years, but that stuff sticks to you. Anyway, fast forward to last year. I'd been working quietly on my own business. Nothing flashy, just a small workshop and storefront downtown where I could sell custom pieces and take on bigger commissions. I didn't tell my family much about it, because honestly, I didn't want their opinions hanging over me. But when it came time to open, I figured, fine, I'll extend an olive branch. I typed out a short message in our family group chat. Hey, just letting you all know I'm opening my own business this weekend. Would love to see you there. I didn't expect confetti emojis or applause, but I wasn't prepared for how quickly they managed to ruin it. Corinne was the first to respond. We're busy. No explanation, no congratulations. Just those two words. My dad followed right after. Don't expect support from us. Focus on being realistic instead of chasing things that won't last. I just stared at the screen for a minute. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, a dozen sharp comebacks swirling in my head. Instead, I just typed one word back. All right. That was it. I didn't push, didn't argue. I put my phone down and went back to sanding the edge of a walnut table I'd been working on for weeks. But here's the thing. My dad thinks silence means defeat. Corinne thinks disinterest means superiority. What neither of them realized was that I had already set things in motion far beyond a simple weekend opening. Because 2 days later, when Lionel unfolded his morning newspaper at the kitchen table and Corinne scrolled through the same headline on her phone, their expressions must have shifted from smug dismissal to something much sharper. And that's where things really started to spiral. Want me to continue into what they saw in the newspaper and how the drama escalates? Here's the continuation of your slow burn, detailed Reddit-style story, still in first person, still casual, keeping the family toxic and villainous while the tension rises. I'll stop again at a sharp turning point so you can decide when to push forward. I don't know exactly who opened it first, but the headline that morning was impossible to miss. A full spread in the local paper with a photo of me, standing in front of my new storefront, arms crossed, smiling like I hadn't been told my entire life that I'd never amount to much. The headline read, "Local craftsman opens high-end workshop, already has waiting list of clients." Now here's the thing. I didn't call the newspaper. I didn't buy ad space. One of my early clients, a gallery owner named Sabine, had been so impressed with my work that she pitched the story herself. I didn't even know it was coming until the reporter called to ask for a quick interview. It was short, maybe half an hour. I talked about why I loved building, how I'd started in my dad's garage, how I wanted to create pieces that would last longer than anything mass-produced. Nothing fancy, nothing cocky, just honest. But when my family read that, oh, you'd think I had declared war. The family group chat, which had been quiet since my "all right" message, lit up like a bonfire. Corinne, seriously? You let the whole city know before your own family. Dad, you're embarrassing yourself. This article makes you sound like you think you're some kind of visionary. Mom, finally chiming in, I don't know why you had to drag the family name into this. I reread that last one 3 times. Drag the family name? All I'd said in the article was that I started building things in my dad's garage. That was it. Somehow, to them, that was a slight. I didn't respond. Not yet. I had too much to do with the opening coming up, and honestly, part of me wanted to see just how far they'd take it without me feeding into it. But I found out quickly they weren't going to stay behind their phones. That evening, as I was setting up the last of the displays in the shop, I heard the familiar sound of my dad's car pulling up outside. The kind of sharp, impatient honk of his horn that he always used when he expected someone to come running. When I stepped out, Lionel was already striding across the sidewalk in his pressed shirt and polished shoes, Corinne trailing right behind him in her business blazer, arms crossed so tightly it looked painful. He didn't bother with greetings. "You think this is funny?" he said, holding up the folded newspaper like it was evidence in a trial. You think you can parade around town pretending you've built something real? Corinne added, you should have at least told us what you were planning. It looks desperate, like you're clinging to this little project. Little project. That phrase hit harder than I wanted it to, but I kept my voice steady. It's not a project. It's my business. And no, I didn't parade anything. Someone thought my work was worth writing about. That's not my fault. My dad shook his head, looking past me into the shop windows as if he was surveying a wreck. You'll embarrass yourself, and by extension us. It's better to stop now before you dig yourself deeper. That was the moment I realized. They didn't come to talk. They came to shut me down. And as I stood there, watching Lionel and Corinne circle like vultures around something they didn't understand, I felt a decision forming in the back of my mind. I stood in front of them for a long moment, letting their words hang in the air like the last note of a song that shouldn't have been played. Lionel's face was red, tight with that particular combination of anger and wounded pride that I had seen since childhood whenever something didn't go his way. Corinne looked like she was about to storm in and tell everyone in the city how pathetic I was, but I caught the glint of fear in her eyes, just for a second, and it told me everything I needed to know. They weren't prepared for this. Look, I said finally, keeping my voice calm measured. The shop is opening in 2 days. If you want to come, fine. If not, I'll see you on the other side. Corinne scoffed. See us on the other side? What does that even mean? It means, I said, glancing at the rows of freshly finished furniture, the stacks of hand-carved cabinetry, the polished countertops that reflected the warm light just so, that this is happening with or without your approval. They exchanged a look, a silent communication I didn't need to hear. My dad's lip curled, half in contempt, half in disbelief. He had spent decades controlling everything in our house. The way holidays were celebrated, the school awards I was allowed to receive, the friends I could spend time with. And now, here I was, standing in front of him with something concrete, something public, something that people actually wanted, and he had no say in it. Corinne stepped forward, hands on her hips, her voice sharper now. Dad's right. You're going to make a fool of yourself. Everyone's going to see this and think, well, I don't even know, that you're desperate, that you've been coasting on some childish hobby all this time, and suddenly decided you could compete with real business people. I smiled faintly, a slow smile that didn't reach my eyes but was just enough to make them uncomfortable. Funny, I said, because the people who've come to see me already, the ones who pre-ordered, the ones who read the article, they don't seem to think that. That was enough to make Lionel's jaw twitch. He looked like he wanted to yell, but then Corinne stepped up, trying to regain some control. You didn't even warn us before this article came out. You dragged our name through it, through the entire neighborhood, without so much as a word to us. I shook my head. The article mentioned you once, just that I learned to build in the garage. I didn't say anything else. You weren't dragged anywhere. I wasn't even thinking about you when I agreed to the interview. Corinne blinked, frustrated, as though my refusal to grovel or acknowledge their perceived offense was a personal attack. You think you can just ignore us? That will stand by and let you make a spectacle of yourself. I stepped past them into the shop, letting my movements deliberate, confident. Make a spectacle? Maybe, but a spectacle that people want to see. I gestured toward the showroom floor. Look around. Everything in here is custom-made, built to last, sold to people who appreciate quality, people who pay attention, not people who judge based on old grudges. Lionel huffed, his face darkening. You'll never last. You don't understand business. You don't understand networking, branding, strategy. You're going to burn through everything you've got, and then what? Come crying back home. Corinne rolled her eyes. Exactly. And meanwhile, the rest of us have real careers, real achievements. You're setting yourself up for failure. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I walked past the front display, where a freshly polished dining set gleamed under the lights, and toward a large custom shelf I'd built the week before. I ran my hand along the edge, feeling the smoothness, the precision. The wood smelled faintly of cedar and varnish, and for a moment, I let myself breathe in the small victory that had nothing to do with them. Then I turned back. You know what's funny? I said, I've spent years hearing that I wasn't trying hard enough, that I wasn't focused, that I wasn't serious. And yet, here I am, standing in my own shop, selling pieces people actually want, orders lined up for the next 2 months. And you guys, well, you're standing outside, judging, as usual. Corinne opened her mouth, then closed it. Lionel's hands clenched at his sides. I could feel their frustration, the way it radiated off them in waves, because for once, they had no leverage, no control, nothing that had worked for decades. and it was delicious, even if I didn't let it show fully. The next 2 days were tense. I finished final preparations for the opening, stocking the shelves, checking that every detail was perfect, while I kept one eye on the family, who I knew weren't going to let this go quietly. Corinne called me at least 3 times a day, her voice sharp but laced with forced calm. "Are you sure this is a good idea? People might think this is amateurish." I reminded her gently each time. "Orders have already been placed. People already know about it. I'm ready." Lionel didn't call, but I could tell from the texts he sent to Corinne that they were plotting, discussing, trying to figure out how to undermine me before the opening. It wasn't subtle, but I wasn't going to let them know I saw it. The morning of the opening, I arrived at the shop just before sunrise. The streets were quiet, the air crisp, and the shop gleamed like a promise. I unlocked the door, did a final walkthrough, and then stepped outside to hang the small banner I'd had printed. "Grand Opening, Custom Creations by Julian." And then I saw them. Lionel parked across the street, immaculately, and Corinne stepped out of the car like she owned the pavement. My mom was with them this time, clutching her purse tightly, eyes scanning the sidewalk as if she expected people to stop and admire them instead of me. I took a deep breath. They were here. I had expected them to boycott, to ignore, to do whatever petty thing they could, but standing there, watching them hover just off the curb, I realized they were planning to make a scene. I unlocked the shop door and turned to my employees, who were setting up the last of the displays. "Whatever happens," I said quietly, "don't let them get to you. Today isn't about them. It's about what we built." A few minutes later, the first customers arrived. I greeted them warmly, showed them pieces, answered questions. Everything was going perfectly. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw Lionel stepping toward the door, Corinne just behind him, their expressions shifting from irritation to something sharper. Rage, maybe humiliation, definitely a sense of entitlement being bruised. And that's when the first words came out of Lionel's mouth, loud enough for the entire shop to hear. "You can't do this here. You have no right. This is ridiculous. People will see this and think." I cut him off, calm but firm. "You're welcome to stay, but I won't let anyone disrupt my opening." Corinne leaned in, smirking. "We're just here to save you from embarrassing yourself." I smiled at her, a slow, measured smile. "If saving me from embarrassment means showing everyone what you think of my work, go ahead. I've got nothing to hide." And that's when the first crowd of customers, who had just started trickling in, noticed them. Some whispered, some stared, and some pulled out their phones. The moment I had been anticipating, quietly, carefully, finally arrived just as the shop started filling with customers. Lionel and Corinne had no idea how ill-prepared they were for what they were about to walk into. I had learned early on in life that they thrived on intimidation, on control, on the assumption that they could make anyone feel small with just a word or a gesture. But now, the tables were turning. It started small. A woman with a stroller paused near one of my display tables, pointing to a hand-carved bookshelf. "Excuse me," she said, "did you make this? It's beautiful." "Yes, I did," I said, stepping forward with a gentle smile. "All of it is handcrafted." Her face lit up. "I've never seen anything like this. Can I take a closer look?" I nodded. She wandered from table to table, examining the pieces and murmuring appreciations I had longed to hear from someone outside my family. Other customers began trickling in. Some were friends who had pre-ordered pieces. Others were just curious after reading the article. The room began to hum with quiet admiration. Meanwhile, Lionel and Corinne were still trying to assert control. Corinne leaned over to my dad, whispering something sharp, her tone dripping with superiority. "They're going to think you're a fool for letting him do this." Dad muttered something back, shaking his head, his hand clenching into a fist. I told him he was wasting his time. He'll see soon enough. I caught snippets of their conversation and couldn't help but smile faintly. They were so focused on trying to assert authority that they didn't even notice the tide slowly turning against them. Each new customer's gaze wasn't on them. It was on the work, on me, on the tangible proof that all their doubts had been wrong. Then it escalated. One of the pre-ordered clients arrived, a small interior design firm looking to commission a set of bespoke tables. They weren't subtle in their enthusiasm, asking me to show them every piece in detail, taking notes, asking questions. Corinne, in a desperate attempt to assert relevance, stepped closer. "You should probably let him know what he's doing," she said, in a voice loud enough for the client to hear. "Some of these pieces are, well, let's say, unconventional." I didn't flinch. "Thank you for your input," I said, my tone calm, neutral. "But the client and I have discussed exactly what they're looking for. If you'd like, I can show you pieces I think you might enjoy. Corinne blinked, momentarily thrown off balance, but Lionel stepped in, trying a different tactic. We just want to make sure you're not making a mistake, he said, voice shaking slightly, a mixture of anger and disbelief leaking through. People are going to judge. You don't want to embarrass yourself. I let a small smile creep across my face. I've been judged all my life, I said softly, just loud enough for them to hear. This isn't the first time, and it certainly won't be the last. But the people who matter are here now, and they've seen what I can do. And that's when it happened. A client, a man in a sharply tailored suit who had been quietly admiring a corner display, spoke up. Actually, I read about your work in the paper, he said, glancing toward the headline still folded on the counter. I've been following this story since it came out. I'd like to place an order for 3 of your larger pieces. My heart skipped a beat, not because I didn't expect it, but because I knew exactly how it would land on Lionel and Corinne. I watched as their faces changed in real time. Lionel's lips pressed into a thin line. Corinne's eyes widened, a mixture of disbelief and a stab of envy I hadn't seen before. The man continued, I'm redecorating a large office space downtown. These tables and shelves would be perfect. I led him over to the displays, answering his questions patiently, showing him the details he wanted to see. All the while, Lionel and Corinne hovered behind him, like shadows, still trying to assert influence, but now powerless. Each question the client asked me, each expression of interest, each note he scribbled in his portfolio, was another silent victory. And then another unexpected visitor arrived. A journalist who had covered the article came in, camera in hand, ready to do follow-up photos for a feature on local artisans. She started snapping pictures of the workshop, of me with clients, of the craftsmanship on display. Every photo, every click, was a public testament to my work. I caught the hint of panic in Lionel's eyes as the flash went off. He understood instantly what this meant. Their judgment, their attempts to control me, were now documented for the world to see. Corinne, desperate to regain any semblance of authority, tried a new tactic. She stepped forward, her voice raised, Stop taking pictures. This isn't for publication. You shouldn't be encouraging this. This is private. The journalist glanced at her politely, tilting her camera. I'm sorry, but the article will cover your opening, and your work is the subject. It's public knowledge. Corinne turned to me, face red, trembling with frustration. You didn't warn us. You never told us this would happen. I looked at her calmly, letting the quiet authority in my voice sink in. I didn't warn you because I wasn't trying to involve you. This is my work, my shop, my opening. You're welcome to observe, but nothing more. My dad, not to be outdone, tried a final attempt. He stepped closer, voice louder. You're making a spectacle of yourself. People are going to think we failed to guide you, that we were negligent as parents. This is a disgrace. I finally allowed myself a small laugh, almost imperceptible, but just enough. A spectacle? I said. Maybe, but a spectacle that people enjoy, that people value. And judging by the line outside, the waiting list, and the orders being placed today, it seems my failure is actually a success. That's when it hit me, the pivotal shift. The crowd had noticed the tension between us. The hushed whispers, the exchanged glances, the subtle pointing. Lionel and Corinne were no longer the center of attention. They had become the spectacle themselves. Every customer who walked in was watching them squirm, watching them fail to assert the control they had always assumed they possessed. And then it happened. The first customer actually spoke up. I don't mean to be rude, she said, addressing Lionel and Corinne directly, but it seems like your son, or brother, is doing something really impressive here. Maybe you should appreciate that instead of criticizing. The words hit them like a slap. Lionel's face turned white. Corinne's jaw tightened. I could feel the simmering rage, the sense of injustice boiling beneath their carefully maintained facades. They had no defense, no way to regain dominance. Every word, every gesture they had used to belittle me over the years had been flipped back on them, in the most public, undeniable way possible. I watched them, quietly, patiently. The power was mine now, not because I had forced it, but because it had revealed itself naturally, through proof and patience and preparation. They were exposed, stripped of the influence they had relied on for decades. And then, as the shop filled with more customers and the energy shifted completely in my favor, Lionel leaned in close to Corinne, muttering something I couldn't quite hear, his eyes darting to me like he was trying to find some angle, some way to regain control. Corinne's hands trembled as she adjusted her jacket. We need to leave, she hissed. No, I said softly, though loud enough for them to hear. This is exactly where you should be. Witnessing the result of years of underestimation. They froze, and I saw the first crack in their composure. My mom, who had been silent until now, wrung her purse straps nervously, her lips pressed together. I could see the shame beginning to mix with anger, creating a cocktail they were clearly unprepared to handle. And that's when it happened. A knock at the door from someone who shouldn't have been here, someone they hadn't accounted for. Their eyes widened, recognition dawning, and I realized immediately the next move was mine. The knock at the door was deliberate, steady, and carried with it a weight that made both Lionel and Corinne flinch visibly. My hand paused mid-motion, adjusting the display, as I glanced toward the entrance. The customers shifted their attention slightly, sensing something out of the ordinary, but they stayed quiet, curious. When I opened the door, I wasn't greeted by anyone new. It was someone familiar, someone they couldn't influence or intimidate. Someone who could, with just a simple gesture, undo all the carefully curated image of control my family had built over decades. It was my cousin Ezra. Ezra, who had spent his whole life reveling in putting me down, showing up at family events to humiliate me publicly, and acting like he was the model child while I was the joke. His smile was calm, almost smug, but there was a calculation behind it, like he had just been waiting for the perfect moment. "Julian," he said, his voice smooth, almost too polite. "I heard about your grand opening. Congratulations. I thought I'd see it for myself." The room went cold for a second. Lionel and Corinne's faces froze, shock flickering into panic. "You," Corinne spat, her voice sharp and angry. "What are you doing here?" Ezra smiled faintly, glancing past her to look at me. "I'm here to see the shop, of course, but I thought I'd bring a little something along." And with that, he held up a folder thick with papers. I didn't need to read them to know what they were. The culmination of years of preparation, careful research, and quiet planning. Documents, contracts, agreements, letters of intent. All the proof that I had quietly built the foundation for a full takeover of my family's assumptions and their little empire of control. "You've been busy," Lionel muttered, almost under his breath, as his hand went to his forehead. "I have," I said, calmly stepping forward. "And this is the part where it counts. This," I said, gesturing to the folder, "is everything that shows I don't need anyone's approval, and more importantly, it's everything you can't control." Ezra nodded, handing the folder over to me. I set it on the display table, opened it carefully, and began spreading out the documents. The customers' murmurs grew, intrigued. I didn't rush. The point wasn't speed. It was the slow, deliberate reveal. Corinne tried to intervene. "Wait, what is that? You're just showing private family matters here." I looked at her, calm, controlled, letting each word land. "No, these are agreements, legal documents, and proofs of ownership that demonstrate what I've built while you were busy assuming I would fail." Lionel stepped closer, voice louder now, trembling with frustration. "This is ridiculous. You've dragged us into." I held up a hand, silencing him. "No, you dragged yourselves into this the moment you decided to belittle every effort I've ever made. Every insult, every mockery, every small idea comment. It's all documented, and now, publicly, you're going to see the results." Ezra leaned slightly toward me, quietly. "They never expected this, did they?" I shook my head. "No, they think their entitlement is enough. That simply because they shouted louder, frowned harder, they could dominate. But it's not. It never was." The customers were watching closely now. Some whispered among themselves, eyes darting between my family and the spread of papers that detailed contracts with suppliers, pre-orders, even letters from city officials praising the shop's contribution to local commerce. Every document was a testament to months, years, of preparation that my family had ignored, mocked, or attempted to belittle. Corinne's face went red, her hands tightening into fists. "You think you can just flaunt this in front of everyone? You're insane." "I think," I said, keeping my voice steady, "that you should see what happens when your opinions aren't the ones that matter. That's all." Lionel started pacing, muttering under his breath, but the muttering soon escalated. "This is ridiculous. You can't just, people are watching. This is going to ruin everything." I pointed toward the first customer, the one who had come in with pre-orders. "Excuse me, could you show them what you're getting? The pieces you ordered." The customer, a distinguished man in a tailored suit, nodded and gestured toward the bespoke tables and shelves. "I'd be happy to. These pieces are exceptional. And frankly, I wouldn't be working with anyone else for this project. Mr. Julian here has delivered exactly what we need." I could see the shift in Lionel and Corinne instantly. They had assumed, with every fiber of their being, that I was still small, irrelevant, a hobbyist in their eyes. And now the evidence of my success was standing right in front of them, praised and validated by people who didn't care about family politics or history. They cared about quality, about dedication, about results. Corinne, desperate, tried a final attempt at humiliation. She stepped in front of a display, waving her arms. You think this makes you special? You think you've suddenly proven something? This is temporary. People will lose interest. You'll fail, and then what? I let her words hang in the air, because they were true. In a way, they would be my fuel. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into the folder and pulled out a contract signed just the week before. It was a long-term agreement with a chain of boutique hotels, a contract that guaranteed commissions for the next year. Then let me show you something else, I said, spreading the contract across the table for them to see. Not temporary, not a hobby, guaranteed, signed, legally binding. And yes, while you were busy criticizing, I made sure no one could stop this. You don't get a say in it. You haven't for years, and you certainly won't now. Lionel's face went pale, almost sick. His hand shook as he reached out, almost instinctively, as if trying to touch the papers and stop them from existing. I didn't let him. Corinne was near hysteria. This isn't fair. You can't. Nobody, this is insane. A few of the customers who had been observing this interaction politely stepped back, murmuring compliments about my work, about the professionalism and quality. Every glance toward me reinforced what I already knew. My family's influence had crumbled in the eyes of everyone in the room. Their tactics, their entitlement, their attempts to dominate, they had failed spectacularly. Ezra leaned toward me again, voice quiet, amused. It's incredible, isn't it? They thought their interference would control the narrative. And now, he gestured vaguely at the room. They're just spectators. I nodded, letting the silence stretch for a beat before speaking. This is just the beginning. And then came the final blow for the morning. A woman from a rival local business walked in, someone who had always scoffed at my family's opinions and at my potential. She glanced at Lionel and Corinne, then at me. I read about this in the newspaper, she said, eyes gleaming. I didn't think it could be this good. Are you taking new clients? The customers around us perked up, murmuring in approval. I smiled, confident. Yes, absolutely. We're just getting started. Corinne's lips trembled, her hands gripping the edges of the display like she could physically stop it from existing. Lionel's posture slumped slightly, the first visible sign of defeat. My mom, silent until now, looked like she was reconsidering every single thing she had ever said to me. And as I watched them, standing there, humiliated and powerless, I felt a quiet, slow satisfaction that was nothing like pride. It was vindication, the long, steady kind that comes from planning and patience. I had opened my shop. I had done what they said I couldn't. I had quietly built leverage, reputation, and undeniable proof of success. And now, they were watching it happen, helpless. I could see the tension radiating off Lionel and Corinne like heat from a furnace. Every glance they exchanged, every tight-lipped mutter, screamed entitlement, rage, and disbelief. But this time, they had nothing, no leverage, no public sympathy, no control. The shop was full of clients, neighbors, and curious passers-by who had read about the grand opening. Every one of them was now a witness to what my family really was: critical, jealous, and incapable of celebrating anyone else's success. I took a deep breath, walking past the table covered in contracts and orders. Everyone, please, feel free to take a look around, I said casually, as if nothing was happening, though internally I was savoring every reaction. If you want to place an order or schedule a consultation, just let me know. This is what I do, and I love sharing it. The first major blow came when a reporter who had covered my initial article stepped inside with a camera crew. She began filming the shop for a follow-up segment. They interviewed customers, capturing their excitement and genuine admiration for my work. Then she turned her lens on the back of the room, where my family was standing, and asked a pointed question. And how do you feel about your son and brother's success here today? Lionel opened his mouth, as if to speak, but the words faltered. He glanced at Corinne and my mom, who were all equally caught off guard, their perfectly rehearsed criticisms evaporating in the presence of witnesses. Corinne tried to step in with a sharp, rehearsed comment about business prudence, but the reporter cut her off politely. Yes, but I mean, this is a full shop, waiting lists, commissions impressive, isn't it? Every word was a mirror reflecting back their failure to guide, to nurture, or even to recognize the effort I had put in quietly for years. And the camera made it permanent. I watched my parents' faces. Lionel's jaw tightened. He looked as though he wanted to storm out, but something inside him kept him rooted in place. Corinne's lips quivered. She was both furious and humiliated, and my mom shifted awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the exposure. I let them stew for a moment before I spoke again. This isn't a hobby. This isn't a project. This is a business, and it's doing exactly what I hoped. People value it. People care about the work, not the drama, not the family politics. And for the first time, I see that you can't control the narrative anymore. The crowd murmured in agreement. Some of the customers looked directly at Lionel and Corinne as if seeing them for the first time. They weren't proud, supportive family members. They were bitter, jealous, and toxic observers who had spent decades underestimating me. Corinne tried one last tactic, turning toward the group of customers who had been admiring my pieces. You shouldn't trust him. You don't know if. A client interrupted her gently. Actually, we've seen exactly what he can do. And we've read the article. Honestly, your judgment doesn't matter to us. This work speaks for itself. I felt a quiet thrill, seeing them realize, in front of everyone, that their words carried no weight anymore. Every insult they had thrown at me over the years came back to them like a shadow, powerless, bitter, and humiliating. Then came the final nail. I gestured toward the contracts that had been quietly waiting on the table, agreements with local galleries, boutique hotels, and interior designers. These are all long-term commissions, secured months ago. Every project, every order, everything in this shop, completely independent of family approval. And yes, it's all legally binding. Lionel's face went pale. Corinne's fingers curled at her sides. My mom looked like she wanted to shrink into herself. You planned all this, Lionel muttered, shaking his head. You didn't just stumble into it. I planned, I prepared, I executed, I said, voice steady calm. While you were busy dismissing every idea, every effort, every ounce of potential I had. The rest of the day unfolded like a slow, exquisite triumph. Clients poured in, praising the craftsmanship, placing orders, and taking photos of their favorite pieces. The media crew documented it all. Every frame, every comment, every handshake was proof that I had built something undeniable. My family tried to move through the crowd, trying to interject, to appear relevant, to somehow assert influence, but each attempt was thwarted naturally by the circumstances. Every conversation they tried to dominate was met with polite but firm disinterest. Every pointed comment was met with polite acknowledgement, followed by attention shifting back to the work. By the end of the day, I had personally signed contracts for the next 6 months, scheduled delivery and installation for multiple clients, and established a steady stream of new inquiries. The shop was buzzing with energy, excitement, and genuine appreciation, things my family had never given me. As the last customers left, I closed the doors and turned to look at my family. Lionel stood stiffly, Corinne muttering under her breath, and my mom quietly shaking her head. You see this, don't you? I asked calmly. This isn't luck. This isn't chance. This is what can happen when someone actually applies themselves instead of tearing others down. Corinne's face twisted, trying to summon the venom she had used all her life. You think this makes you better than us? I shook my head. Better? No. Independent? Yes. I don't need your approval. I never have. Lionel opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. His authority had evaporated, replaced by the undeniable proof of my success. He looked like a man who had finally realized that his control over me and his attempts to dominate my life were gone forever. My mom finally spoke, voice tight with frustration. You didn't need to prove anything. You could have. I didn't need to prove anything to you, I said, cutting her off gently but firmly. I did it for myself, and I did it in a way that made sure no one here could stop it. They had no rejoinder, nothing that could undo what had been done. Their attempts at belittling, criticizing, and controlling me had not only failed, they had made them look small, petty, and jealous to everyone who mattered. And that, finally, was the end of it. By the evening, my family had slunk out of the shop quietly, humiliated, defeated, and fully aware that I had finally won the long game. I locked the doors behind them, leaned against the counter, and looked around at the space I had built, completely independent, entirely my own. The orders were lined up. The reputation was growing. And my family, they had been exposed, publicly, as the villains they always were, jealous, controlling, and unable to recognize anyone else's achievement. I didn't forgive them. I didn't need to. They had spent years undermining me, and now the evidence of their toxicity was on display for everyone who mattered. And as I closed the shop for the night, I realized something that had never been true before. I didn't need them, not for validation, not for support, and certainly not for approval. I had finally, completely outmaneuvered them. And for the first time in my life, the victory was mine alone. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.